and remembering what type of factoring to use and when. That chart I think was helpful. It just, now for the exam, you guys can actually use it. So the first problem here, number 7, asks us to use a GCF to factor these two. So what does that mean I can take out?
Oh no, 6.
6, but how many ends? 3, because there's 3 that can come out of each of those. So I'm going to divide those out. So 12 divided by 6 is going to be 2. N to the 4th over N to the 3rd is just going to be N. And then these guys will cancel, so we just write -1 from there. And that's it. So when it asks to factor by a GCF, that's all you have to do there, and you can stop. Now, if you're curious as to why we're stopping, because they just said to do a GCF, remember this is 2 terms, and the only thing we can do with 2 terms other than a GCF is difference of squares, and those 2n is not a perfect square. You're going to use it and like it.
Yes.
All right, the next one is grouping. Remember, grouping is when we have 4 terms. If you put 4 people in a group, it'd probably be 2 and 2. It'd be mean to do 3 and 1. So looking at these first two terms, just like we did over here, we pull out what's common. So there's a 4a to the 2nd I can pull out of those first 2 terms. So I'm dividing that out of these 2. So I'll be left with a, and then I'll be left with 3, positive. Ooh, this one's a tough one. Now this one, not this part, but later, I'll show you. Out of these 2, we can pull out a -1. And I'm left with a plus 3. This is kind of an advanced one here. So we have the same thing twice. We have a plus 3. And then I'm left with 4a squared minus 1. Right? Yeah, so if you stopped here, did pretty well. I mean, you factored by grouping. However, these 2, again, just like I mentioned in the first problem, check and see. It's 2 terms. This actually happens to be a difference of squares problem. It's 2 terms, and they're both perfect squares. So if you notice that, you can go further on this one. And I would totally understand if you missed that, because you're like, oh, I just finished grouping, I'm good to go. Should be a parenthesis there. So 4a squared is going to be 2a and 2a. And then 1 is going to be positive and -1. Now it's completely factored. That was definitely a tough one. So especially those of you guys who worked ahead, I think you would ask about. So that can go a little bit further. All right, the last 3 we're going to talk about here are the other ones off the chart we haven't really mentioned in particular. So these first couple, I think this is probably the toughest part for you guys, is when it's 3 terms trying to decide which type I'm doing. And I don't really have great names for any of them. So this first one, when it's just a y squared, I automatically know it has to be the same variable twice. So I automatically go towards, obviously it's y, so I'm going to use y and y. And then I want to multiply to get -20, but add to get 8. Multiply to -20, but add to get 8. So those are our multiples that multiply to a -20, but add to a positive. So it's the -2 and 10. So this one, I don't have to do that big x thing if I don't want to. I mean, that does work. Like, the x thing works anytime there's 3 terms and it's factorable. But I think something like this is a little bit easier to just do this method. Now when there's a number in the front, you want to check for a GCF first. But this one doesn't have a GCF. There's no common factor among 8, 57, and 7. So this is the kind that we do have to do this X thing. So I call that splitting the middle. That's like the middle term gets split up. So we're going to multiply those two together. And then I want to add to a negative 57. Now when the number is that big, I tend to think about numbers that are really far apart from one another. So don't forget about that 1 and 56, because that's actually it. So it's a negative 1 and a negative 56 that's going to allow me to split this middle term up. And you could do 56 and 1. I don't know why I put the 1 first this time. But. So those are our factors that multiply to positive 56 but add to negative 57. And now I do grouping on this one. Out of these two, I can take out a negative 7. It's a little bit tough one to factor. And we get the same thing twice. Oops. So that's it completely factored now. All those two terms, they're not difference of squares or anything crazy like that. All right, and then our last one here, it's two terms. Should always check for GCF first, but there's no common factor among 9 and 25. So since there's no common factor, instead, I'm going to try perfect squares. It's minus, so that looks pretty good. 9k to the second is going to be 3k and 3k. And then, sorry, those k's are questionable. And then to get 25, it's going to be 5 and 5. Okay. All right. This is the forgotten chapter I'm handing out next. Yeah. It just was so long ago I forgot it happened. Or I guess I forgot it happened in this semester. I think I was thinking it showed up in the previous semester. We're actually going to start on the back side of the sheet, so the holes are going to be on the right side. Yeah, that's thrown off your world. Sorry.
Oh wait, this was chapter 6?
Yeah. It's not bad,
I'm
right?
trying to refresh my brain for a second.
No, it's okay.
Okay, wait, alright, I got this.
Then this is it. Once we have this one, this is all the chapters. So we basically did 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, that's it. 6, 7, 8, 9. I was thinking this was in a previous, like, I thought we put this on the first semester exam, but we hadn't. We hadn't gotten to it yet. We'll blame COVID.
I don't know how much longer we can blame it on.
I know. I'm hoping we can't blame it much longer because that means we moved on, but. Okay, so we're going to start on this side. So it looks like like I said, the holes should be on the right side of your paper. It's typically the other way, but. So the front side will be extra practice for you guys. So I'd like to finish this up. then we can take our break, and then you guys will have time to work on the reviews, work on your note card, kind of make sure you guys are feeling okay about everything. So kind of less structured in the second half here. So the big things to remember with graphing by inequalities, there's kind of two things we had to remember. So one of them is an open versus closed circle on my number line. And then the other thing is if I multiply or divide by a negative, I have to flip the inequality. There's also some compound inequalities in here, and then there's a little bit of absolute value that I'll remind you of as well. So these 6 questions kind of encompass everything we talked about in this chapter on a really kind of tiny scale. So, like I said, on the other side of the page, there's going to be more practice if you're looking for it. All right, so we want to basically solve for x in these problems. So I'm going to move this 4 over first. So move the 4 over, but notice x is being multiplied by a -2. When we go to solve that, we're going to divide by -2, and that's when we have to flip the inequality. My inequality will now face the other way. And I just usually wrote flip there just so you guys remember and you didn't like look away and say what just happened there. She messed that up. So it was intentional that we flipped that inequality. Guys, stay with us please on this. Like I said, we'll take a break after we go through these. So I go to put this on my number line and I'm trying to show where my solutions are, like where does it work? And so in this case, since we don't have the equal to line, that means -6 is not part of the solution. So we do an open circle there. But then if you look, it's trying to eat the -6. That means x is actually smaller than -6. So we're going to go to the left. We're going to go towards smaller numbers. And notice my number line, it goes from smallest to largest. So -7, if you think about temperature, it's actually colder than -5. So we're getting warmer going this way. That kind of coming back to you. It's kind of not a bad chapter to have forgotten about because it wasn't impossible, but at the same time, it was a while ago. Now number 2, what are we going to do first to get that x alone? Yeah, let's get rid of that divide by 2. So I'm going to multiply each side by 2. Because then that will move. That 2 will cancel with that one. So I'll be left with x plus 7 is greater than or equal to 12. Because 6 times 2 is 12. Then when I go to get my x alone, I'm going to move that 7 over, so we're going to subtract 7. So in this case, I didn't have to do any flipping of the inequality because I never multiplied or divided by a negative. But this time we fill our circle in because 5 is part of the solution. It has that equal to line. That means 5 works. And now this time it's trying to eat the x. That means x is bigger, so we're going to go bigger. We're going to go this way. Yep. Yeah. All right, so our next couple are compound inequalities. So it was and or inequalities. And so if you guys recall, and inequalities kind of look like a little bridge, or inequalities were like the oars of a boat, so out on the outside there. So when we're doing this and inequality, it's like there's three parts of this problem. Rather than being like two sides of an equation, there's three parts. And I want to get the x alone in the center. So I'm going to try to isolate that x in the middle there. So I'm going to move this 4 out of there. But if I move it out of the middle, I have to move it out of either side. So we have 2 here. In the middle, right now I have a 2x. And here I have 20. So I want to get that x alone in the center. So it's being multiplied by 2, so I'm going to divide by 2. But I'm going to divide all 3 parts by 2. So 2 over 2 is 1. So this, when we're done, is considered a compound inequality. And what we're doing with that is, again, we're going to put both of those numbers on our number line. Oops, should be 1, smaller than 10. 1 and 10. Now the 1's going to be an open circle, the 10's going to be closed, and it's basically saying anything between 1 and 10 works. So this is kind of like when we talked about the years you're in high school. You're in between like 14 and 18. Those are the range of ages that students are in high school. Just like between 1 and 10 is maybe the ages of kids in elementary school or something like that. I guess not 1-year-olds. Really smart 1-year-olds are in elementary school. All right. Now number 4 is an OR inequality. And I think OR inequalities are even easier because all you're doing is just solving each of them, kind of keeping them completely separate from each other, and then just putting them on the same number line. Now I threw a fraction in there because we all love fractions, and you're like, hey, you haven't given us enough fractions lately. So I just put this one in here just to remind you guys how to solve fractions. I like the method where I kind of break the fraction into 2 parts. It looks like it's being divided by 3. So instead I'm going to multiply each side by 3. So it kind of makes it a 2-step equation, but not bad. So 6 times 3 is 18. And then I'll divide by 2. So x is greater than 9. So again, I broke that into 2 steps, nothing too fancy there, but then this one I have to divide by a -3. So that means I have to flip this inequality. So I divide it by a negative. Now I'm going to go and put this on my number line. So my smaller number, larger. This one's a closed circle. This one's open. But it's greater than 9, smaller than -2. Like I said, the oars of a boat. So picture, like there should be an oar on each side. They're both on the same side. Just go in a circle. So each side. Okay. Is that coming back to you guys now? A little bit. Like I said, this was the longest to go, but at the same time, hopefully now it feels like almost the easiest stuff because we've learned a lot harder things since then. Now, absolute value was probably a little bit trickier. Or was a little bit trickier, it wasn't probably. Remember with absolute value, we had to include both solutions. So we had to set up a positive version and a negative version. So we set up two equations / inequalities. So like number 5, I basically set up an equation the normal way. And then I set up a negative version. Because if you guys recall, this is where you covered it up with a little heart, and we said what could be under the heart? Either like a positive or a negative 10. And so then we were saying what values would give us that. So I just have to solve each of these. Now this is not an inequality, so I don't have to worry about any kind of flipping, even though I do divide by a -1. So I end up with this one with a -7. And then also a +13. So we have those two outcomes that both would work in my inequality or my equation. You snuck in.
I got sneaky.
Sneaky. Oh, thank you.
I actually got it, that.
No, I kind of was just thinking about that. Like, no, I remember us talking about it, and I was like, I swore you said she did part of it, and we would turn, yeah, so. Okay, guys, so then on the inequality, this is the last one we're doing today, then we'll take a walk, and then we'll come back and have some time to work on things, make sure you guys are feeling okay about everything. So we're gonna set up our two equations. The first one is exactly how you see it. Do you remember what happens with the second equation in this case? This one's a special one. We have to switch that, oh, sorry, I switched this, don't switch that. Sorry. 1 + 2x is greater than 9, so this one's the normal way. The other one, I have to flip the inequality and change the sign of the 9. I'm gonna put it, I'll put it down here. So this one flips and the sign of the 9 changes. So I have the two equations here. The one is the normal one, the other one is negative, but it also flips. And this is going to end up being a compound inequality, kind of like those and or ones. Oh, that should be -10. Sorry. I can subtract, I swear. So x is also less than -5. So here's our two answers. When I go to put those on my number line, I have to make sure I kind of talk my way through this. So it's a -5, a +4. Open circles, but it's greater than 4, but less than -5, so this one ends up being an OR inequality. And kind of identifying that and being comfortable with that is kind of important because your graph and your equation should make sense. It should kind of go together. All right, so real quick here, we'll talk about kind of what still needs to be done. Like things we'll come back from break and work on this stuff. So, so you have your review packet. Remember that is due Friday for you guys. So that should come to the exam done. Now this took us, that was basically 3 days of homework. Normally homework's 4 points a day, so I'm considering it to be like a 12-point packet. It's a bigger homework assignment because it's a bigger test, so we want to make sure we're preparing for that. The review packet's due, so I will collect that. Now, I'm not going to technically assign this Chapter 6 review, the front side. However, I would highly recommend the Chapter 6 review gets done as well. So I would suggest doing that as well. That's the front side of the page we just were working on. You should also be working on your note card. So front side and back you can use of that note card. Any missing work. These are things we can be working on when we get back from break. So when we get back from break, playing on your phone right now, it's not gonna be okay. Just we have too much stuff we have to do. Until the point you're at where all this is done and your note card is perfect, which I'm guessing no one's quite there yet, I would ask that you guys take care of these things first. Also guys, just be aware, look at your overall grade. If you look at your overall grade and you realize, yikes, I really didn't realize I was getting a D in here, I didn't really want a D. Like, coming to me on Friday and saying like, how do I get my grade up is too late. So being aware that maybe tomorrow morning you come in here and work for a while on some things and you're kind of on the last minute anyhow, but I prefer you guys, you know, sooner rather than later, start looking at your grades and trying to figure out where you guys want to be at the end. So those are things we can be working on. Also, just a quick reminder, if you have a textbook, those have to come back to me on Friday. Otherwise you get charged for them and you don't want to pay for an algebra textbook because who wants an algebra textbook? But you probably have one just like laying in the bottom of your locker or maybe in your bedroom somewhere. So if you're unsure if you have one, you did sign one out earlier in the year. So let me know, I can always tell you if you have one or not. Some of you didn't even take them. All right, questions? All right, so let me just get this online.